cremated? Pause. Oh my god, it could be nut.
Radio Free Infinite episode 313. You know, one of the original stated goals of the Norwegian black metal movement was to take metal back to what it should be doing, in opposition to corporate death metal bands at the time that they called, rather sardonically, life metal. Now, whether or not you agree with that argument is besides the point, but that is what they were about, to the point where you had people like Euronymous saying that Judas Priest's British Steel had more to do with metal than death metal era napalm death albums like Harmony Corruption. Now, I do love Harmony Corruption, but I think that Norwegian black metal probably wouldn't sound the way it does. It wouldn't have the same spirit behind it that it does if it wasn't created expressly in opposition to what they saw as more societally compliant metal. But getting back to that initial point about the goal of Norwegian black metal to take metal back to its roots, what could be more true Norwegian black metal than recreating the new wave of British heavy metal movement of the late 70s and early 80s? That's got to be about as pure metal as you can get. And who better to do so than the Japanese?
Samurai fool! Your efforts are in vain again. This gateway to the past is once more beyond your reach. You can fly?
No. Jump good.
And that's what this episode is going to be all about. Of movement within Japan, I have dubbed the NWOJHM, the new wave of Japanese heavy metal, in honor of and in reference to the NWOBHM, the new wave of British heavy metal from the early 80s that all these bands are so inspired by.
안 골라 이건. 포기, 패스.
See, you might think that this episode would just be all about the band Metal Lucifer, given both their connections to black metal and the fact that they are the heavy metal collective that gave us not only the heavy metal and the heavy metal, but also the not to mention the and they do seem to be the new wave of British heavy metal revival act of choice amongst the black metal listenership. However, the new wave of Japanese heavy metal we're talking about goes back even farther to the roots of new wave of British heavy metal stuff. We're talking before bands like Angel Witch and Iron Maiden were even putting out full-length albums. Back when the new wave of British heavy metal was nothing but a bunch of independent bands cranking out 7-inch singles and very crackly, tape-hissy demos. That new wave of British heavy metal aesthetic is what has championed by what I have dubbed the new wave of Japanese heavy metal. The band that kind of started all this off was Magnesium, who, like Metal Lucifer, are heavily connected to the band Sabbath, that I covered back on episode 267. You should probably go watch that for more info on Sabbath if you're interested. But Magnesium's connection to Sabbath is that they are the main band of Shinji Itachi, who is the brother of the main guy behind Sabbath, Masaki Itachi.
John Freeman, who is Gordon Freeman's brother.
And in fact, in the very early days of Sabbath, Shinji Itachi was a member of the band. If you hear really early Sabbath, it makes sense that one of the masterminds behind that era of Sabbath would go on to start up the new wave of Japanese heavy metal. Because while still being recognizable as the deviously melodic yet incredibly evil black metal act that they're known for being nowadays, this stuff has a whole lot of very obvious new wave of British heavy metal influence. Sabbath in the mid-80s had about as much in common with Grim Reaper as it did with Merciful Fate and Venom. And they were only really capitalizing this style on that first single they ever released, but there's elements of it going further into Sabbath's history. But Shinji Itachi leaves before Sabbath gets any full-length albums out and starts up a band initially known as Buried Alive. Then they change their name to Magnesium, and he goes against the early 90s extreme metal grain even harder than the Norwegians do by putting out basically old demo-style new wave of British heavy metal shit in 1994 when nobody else was doing that. A lot of this early era of Magnesium is a very Diamond Head sort of proto-thrash sound to it. And like a lot of Japanese bands, there is a heavy emphasis on very emotive and catchy lead guitar lines that are an integral part of the music. But whereas one of the distinguishing factors of a lot of Japanese heavy metal and power metal at the time was its sort of futurism and emphasis on showmanship, Magnesium were a lot more laid back and 70s sounding in a way that almost seems transgressive for the time, given how different it was from everything else coming out around them. Particularly in regards to Shinji's vocals, which are very laid back and not the sort of super extreme vocal performance you'd expect from, say, a visual K band from the same time period. I actually really like Shinji's vocals. I know some people might not be into them. You know, they're not very technically adept. They got a lot of soul to them in a way that mirrors both the guitar sound and guitar playing of this release. And he does occasionally pick up the intensity. A whole lot of very earnest emotionality to this stuff. Right here, a little Buried Alive chorus referencing the prior name of the band. He's gonna get intense again right here. You know, he's pushing his technical abilities to the absolute limit without regard for the laws of good taste in a way that's actually pretty punk, and that's kind of what the new wave of British heavy metal was all about. So it makes sense that the new wave of Japanese heavy metal would be operating from a similar ideological standpoint, making absolutely primitive shit.
How much primitive can you get?
We're talking so primitive that there's songs on the early Magnesium demos that make do not with 3 riffs, not with just a verse and a chorus riff. We're talking 1 riff in the song, and it actually works because said single riff will generally be very catchy and very muscular, but also they'll use it as a springboard for little lead guitar variations, having the bass line keep up the main melody while the solo guitars go off into outer space. And then when the incredibly charismatic and heartfelt vocals kick in, they'll sort of spin off their own counter melody that wraps itself around that singular guitar riff in very interesting ways. He's got a real sense of emotional tension down to the parts where he'll pause and then jump back into the music almost for a dramatic emphasis, like he's narrating to you a story. Here's another cool variation. It's still that same main riff from earlier. He's just kind of moving it up and down the neck in order to generate tension for that hyper-emotional chorus. I mean, maybe I'm just but this whole chorus kind of gets me a little choked up. You know, raises up the hair on the back of my neck. Makes a real emotional impact. And ain't that what music's all about? That's not to say Magnesium is always incredibly primitive. In fact, as you move further into their career, the vocals get a little bit more normal sounding, and the guitar playing really starts to take off. I mean, check out this shit right here from 1996. It doesn't have that same sort of demo-like warmth to the sound. In fact, it's very cold, harsh, and biting, while still maintaining that source of soulful emotionality that's always been a big part of Magnesium's sound. But I want to call your attention to this riff right here. Like, for real, this shit's pretty bonkers. And you know what it surprisingly kind of reminds me of?
어플로 주문을 하던가?
Yeah, it sounds like something you'd hear on an NSBM album. Like, specifically, check out this Peste Noir riff. Then compare that to this. Like, it's got a pretty similar melodic character to my ears. Maybe it's because both bands got their roots in classic heavy metal and they also have a heavy emphasis on emotionality and soulfulness. Magnesium has riffs like this for days, particularly towards the latter part of their career into the present day. And I think that's a big part of why the audience for this new wave of Japanese heavy metal stuff isn't necessarily made up of just old school heavy metal people, but rather a whole lot of black metal guys are into this shit. I think it scratches a similar emotional itch. Speaking of emotionality, the band building up here now to one hell of an emotive lead guitar section. I mean, pretty much all of this new wave of Japanese heavy metal stuff is heavily guitar oriented. But the next band we're going to cover from this movement actually de-emphasizes the vocal component even more to almost be purely about the stuff the guitars are doing. That band would be the almighty, and I said almighty, goddammit, Gorgon, who, much like Magnesium, are heavily connected to the Japanese black metal scene, both in the sense that a lot of their releases are done as split 7 inches with bands like Sabbath and Abigail, but also because one of the masterminds behind the Gorgon project, Matsuaki Suzuki, actually has a black metal band with Yasuyuki Suzuki.
No relation.
From the band Abigail called Bitch Eater. You know, if you never heard Bitch Eater, it's actually pretty good stuff. I'd actually describe it as very doomy black metal, almost Black Sabbath if they played black metal, which I'm sure has got some of the speed freaks out there going like... while falling asleep and shit. But for some reason, a lot of the newer black metal I enjoy tends to be sort of a heavy metal, black metal fusion kind of thing. You know, like Agatus's 2016 album, The Eternalist, all the Mallet Carpathan stuff, Devil Master, Spider, that kind of thing. I like that kind of shit, and this band is no exception. And don't worry, they do occasionally speed up from the Black Sabbath-esque sludgy crawl into more of a Venomous, merciful, fade-ish sounding thing. Bitch Eater, really solid band, and yeah, it's got one of the main guys from Gorgon in it. So there you go, that's the Gorgon connection to black metal. Gorgon themselves, however, are 100% part of the NWOJHM, and are probably the most guitar-oriented band of the bunch. A lot of their songs feature these very long, elaborate intros with a bunch of riffs stacked right up next to each other, with guitar solos just erupting over the entire thing, bringing in all these lead guitar melodies before they finally hit you with the riffs. And even those have a much higher emphasis on harmonized guitar lines than Magnesium's more simplistic sound does. See, right here, even on that more percussive riff, they're hitting you with those big-time guitar harmonies before dropping the vocals in. And yeah, admittedly, the vocals aren't as strong as they are in Magnesium, although I do still like them. But even in the vocal-led sections of the song, there's still a shitload of guitar theatrics going on. And in fact, Gorgon songs tend to be a lot more structurally complex than most Magnesium stuff, in addition to being a lot more guitar riff oriented. One thing that isn't so complex would be the lyrics to this particular Gorgon song. I mean, he informs you of the fact that you are a heavy metal superstar approximately 6 million times, which, yeah, you know, is very encouraging.
And I was like, oh, wow, thank you.
Gorgon's got a lot of harmonized guitar sections that go back even older than the new wave of British heavy metal, looking back to stuff like Wishbone Ash and Thin Lizzy, and they're also very emotive and well done. And they blend very well with the more typical sort of heavy metal soloing that forms the backbone of what makes Gorgon so great. In addition to the more metallic aspects of the new wave of British heavy metal, Gorgon do a lot of work that looks to the more hard rock side of that movement, utilizing a wide variety of different guitar textures, gradually opening up the guitar tone in order to create their panoply of metallic and hard rock sounds. And where some of the riffing in Magnesium recalled NSBM moments from Peste Noire, guitar tone on the solo here really reminds me a lot of stuff you might hear on an Absurd album, just with a greater degree of harmonization. But one thing you would never hear on an Absurd album is these dank fucking hand claps. Those are a lot of fun. Back into the more subdued sounding guitars, reminding us that the new wave of British heavy metal had just as much to do with prog rock and new wave music as it did with punk rock and heavy metal. It was actually a very diverse musical movement, and Gorgon reflect that diversity by utilizing all of these different sounds within the same song. There's that very absurd sounding lead guitar line. I'm sure that wasn't intentional, it just has a lot of overlap in sonic character, with a lot of rack stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to justify my taste of the Nazi black metal contingent. I don't owe you anything. Here's some more of that stop-start, more hard rock sounding riffage, leading into the more expansive and surprisingly folky sounding, almost medieval, lengthy guitar solo section of the song. If you haven't noticed, lead guitar is very important for Gorgon, much more so than in Magnesium. And in fact, it is that lead guitar that is the main source of emotionality for this band. This song right here, A Fool in Love, probably my favorite Gorgon song. Love the chiming guitar stuff in the intro. Love the simple yet effective drum build up here, that dun 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 dun. But more than anything, I love this part. In terms of emotional expression through the medium of lead guitar, it's hard to do better than this section right here. Going back into that little build-up bit to let us know that we're going to be jumping into the main meat of the vocal-led section of the song, which also features some really excellent guitar playing with an interesting contrast going on between this super bouncy, sort of sharper edge guitar section that we're listening to right here, and the following more flowing, melodious, harmonized lead guitar section. Again, very much reminiscent of something you might hear in Thin Lizzy or early Paul Di'Anno era Iron Maiden stuff. From there, the guitar playing is again going to move back into that more ringing sort of style that they opened the song with. Really can't get over how good this guitar playing sounds. And then we're jumping back into that build-up section, letting us know that, you know, the sickest part of the song is coming back around again. And this time around, they've introduced a variation of the melody from the intro part of the song, which is also very nice and warm and emotional, and leads into even more tasty soloing. Gorgon's got more amazing lead guitar licks crammed into like 1 3-minute song than most bands can pull off on an entire album, if not over the course of their entire career. Can't recommend Gorgon enough. The final band that we'll be covering on this episode, and perhaps the least talked about band of the new wave of Japanese heavy metal, is Headlight. These guys actually did start right around all the other bands, you know. Magnesium starts off in like 1992, Gorgon starts off in 1995. Headlight comes around a year after Gorgon, but they don't really get anything out until the early 2000s, and they actually still don't have that much material out nowadays, which is a damn shame because they might just be my favorite act of all three, despite the paucity of material available from them. These guys got the same guitarist from Gorgon, but the vocalist, a man credited as Headlight number 1, everybody in this band is like Headlight number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is undoubtedly my favorite vocalist of all the new wave of Japanese heavy metal. And he also does a lot of artwork for a whole lot of bands, including Magnesium and Gorgon. In fact, you can see the word Headlight written on a lot of Gorgon album covers. That's his signature. And it was sort of like letting people know, hey, that Headlight shit's coming. It is gonna hit you hard in the balls when it gets here. Because let me tell you, Headlight rocks harder than just about every other band that attempts to rock. You can see they got all those dank harmonies that you got going on in these other new wave of Japanese heavy metal bands. But then this part in the titular song Headlight hits, and god damn, dude. If that doesn't get your blood pumping, I don't know what will. That's some of the most metal shit I've ever heard. And from there, the vocals do not let up. Like, this dude goes hard as fuck, absolutely pouring his soul out with some really intense fucking vocals. Check this high note, dude. And this fucking chorus. I think that the outrageous Japanese accent actually adds a lot to this music compared to where in Gorgon it might take away from stuff a little bit. Also, this solo section. Check out this little call and response bit here. So fucking good. And then watch both guitar lines kind of tie themselves together into this glorious knot of guitar harmonies. Headlight is so fucking good. I just wish there was more of it because they really only have like a few songs. But what we do have from them is amazing. I'm looking forward to hopefully hearing more from them in the future. Looking forward to hearing more from all three of these bands because they're all pretty spectacular. And if you really want to get down to the most metal stuff out there, as metal as it can possibly be, you can't get more metal than the new wave of Japanese heavy metal. So keep an ear out for more of that stuff. Thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did, and I'll see you around next time.
Okay, so I approve. We're done. Bye.